Good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. Welcome back, or welcome to day 2 of Transforming Transportation, the 22nd edition. Hello to our online participants. Hello to everybody who's in the room right here in the Preston, in Washington, D.C. If you're online, a couple of things that you can do to be part of this conversation, because we are inclusive, is on Wellbank Live. You can be in the chat. You can have the conversation. We have moderators right here in the room who will talk to you. And also you can use the hashtag TTDC25 so that you're always in the room with us as well. The mobile app has been updated so you can find out what is coming up next in today's program, where you should be listening into. It has a QR code. And also on the mobile app, there is interpretation in 60 languages. But the only one they don't have is South London. So I will, it's an indigenous language from the southern part of the United Kingdom, but I will help you in the coffee break if you're not too sure what I am saying. I am your conference moderator, Femi Oke. It is my pleasure to tell you that the Knowledge Exhibition is open and has 9 booths just outside. Please go and enjoy that during the coffee breaks and the breaks during the day. Something very special I want you to look out for, and that is an AI-powered wheelchair that is in the atrium. It comes to us via the National Transportation Center at Morgan State University. Go and check it out, because if you ever go to BWI Airport, you will see it being used there, and it gets into tricky, complicated spaces. Our development partner is FIA Foundation. Thank you for being our partner. And now, the morning, the day, our program continues. I can't think of a better way to start the day. With Axel van Trotzenberg, Senior Managing Director of the World Bank. He is better than a cup of coffee. Good morning. Axel, when you go to conferences and you hear that first keynote conversation, in terms of what you want to hear, energy, dynamism, setting you up for the day, what is your standard?
Coffee. No, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what I'm indeed thinking is the most important thing is how we can energize debates. This is not only here about transport, it's anything on the development area. And of course, when people barely are waking at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, that's a challenge. But I think what we need to here think about is what we are trying to accomplish with this kind of convenings is really to foster exchange and foster learning, but also with a sharp focus. Can we make a difference? Yes or no? And therefore, I think what we need to see is not to have just nice get-togethers, but here is a whole series of ministers of transport, and welcome them, but also a lot of colleagues from across the globe are there. And it is about energizing this debate. It is about impact. What we need to keep in mind is if you have a quarter of the world population have not access to transport, then that's an issue. And if 1 billion people have no access to all-weather roads, then it's an issue. And then when you look in Africa, when we need the growth agenda really picking up so that people have a chance, then you need to have those enabling environments. So there is a very direct discussion about how we can do this. And I think what we need to do is mobilize it, and it is ultimately then the action that needs to follow.
You see transport as being strategic when it comes to development. Can you unpack that more?
Well, these are all the enabling ingredients for development. And I think let's keep this in mind. If we think that, for example, in Africa, the population will double by 2050, we see a massive urbanization coming. And if urbanization is not done right, it will not contribute to welfare and growth. I've worked along in East Asia, China, Vietnam. These countries have used urbanization as really drivers of growth. And these cities were not just creating out of well, let's do something, but there were some planning on this, and it really helped people create jobs and get people out of poverty. That needs to happen also in Africa. And that means that if you do urbanization without transport, you are on the wrong track. It needs to be an integral part of this, and it needs to be looked at as what we need to do. Now, that is one, that realization is there. And secondly, what has to happen is it needs investments. And investments, if you're looking at China, at that times, they were investing 5% of GDP. Now, that's quite a bit. But many countries are investing like less than 0.5%, 0.2%. How do you transform? And even the bank, before I went here, I just looked what we have been committing over the last 10 years in IDA. It's about $2.5 billion per year. You say, well, that's a nice amount. Relate that to the IDA GDP, it's 0.1%. Now, it's good that the bank is doing this, and there is an uptick of transportation investment, including in IBRD. But what that means is, if this is reflecting of what actually public sector is now, is we need to get the private sector in massively. And that needs to be looked at, how we can create critical mass for investments, particularly in IDA countries. My view is then, if we want to get there, and if a $2.7 trillion GDP is then we need probably something of $10 to $15 billion per year in investments. We're not there. So that is the ambition. And I think I like this kind of convenings, not to say how we can administer the status quo, but how to get to the scale.
You've taken us on a brief journey into what is necessary, what needs to be done, how much it will cost. I haven't heard any tangible stories, anecdotes. When I traveled around here, this is what I saw. This is a good model. Because at the moment, it's a series of very beautiful statements. Take us on the ground.
On the road. Well, I cannot say everything in one or 2 minutes. My experience is mostly in Latin America, because I was their country director, and I've seen in Chile, but also particularly in Bogota, in Colombia, with the bus rapid transit systems. Mm-hmm. And they were transformative. And what is actually very useful of these meetings, or of the bank working as a knowledge organization, also that kind of experiences were also helpful in actually learning for the Senegal experience, where there was a bus rapid transport system created. And what's interesting for the World Bank, I think here that's maybe it's, but we talk so much about the one World Bank group, namely you have then the public sector arm, the private sector arm, and then we talk and we talk and we talk. But here we did actually something where actually the public sector arm provided support, and IFC and even MIGA came in with a guarantee. That helped, interestingly, mobilize private sector money to the tune in around $150 million. That is an interesting way how we can replicate it, and it is also, particularly what is important, is doable also in Africa, because sometimes there are the prejudices, but here you could actually get the private sector in. What is more important is that what impact it created is, namely, with this system, people can reach their jobs within an hour commute. If you are looking around in many countries, people have to commute 2 hours to go to work, 2 hours back. So they are like 4-5 hours on the road. And this has reduced dramatically it then also create new job opportunities through that system, but also directly manage the system that's also creating jobs. So that is, I think, what is interesting then when it is doable. And I think that is where we need actually to advertise that a little bit more.
You see our theme here, Axel, driving change, delivering solutions. It can be summed up in one word: implementation, which can sometimes be the most trickiest part of the entire progress to sustainable transportation. What guidance would you give us today as we're discussing implementation? How to do it well, how to do it better?
So before I get into the implementation, I'm more an aspirational guy. And so the reason is you need to know why you're doing this. And if we are say, well, we'll do implement, say that's uninteresting. What's interesting is basically to say we need to drive the change, namely that you actually can contribute to a much improved, say, particularly in the low-income countries. And that needs to be our single focus, that we say we have to create change so that there are job opportunity, there is growth opportunities, and then ask every sector how you can contribute. And then basically you realize that transport is critically important. Therefore, you need to invest, but you need to create coalition. You need to create partnerships, because even if you look in Senegal, cannot be done only with the World Bank. Of course, it has to be driven by the countries themselves. That is the first thing. But then we need to be the complementary force and not the only one. We can work with the other multilateral organization, with other development organization, with the private sector. So we need to have an open mind that driving change is opening also your mindset, that you actually look at a much broader coalition to make it happen. Then I think on the delivering solutions, that is where we need to be the whole time at the cutting edge. This type of events are good to see what are the latest ideas in the industry, what can be done. And I would add here, particularly digital. Data is critical these days, and we use data, but we are barely scratching the surface. And that is not a transportation problem, it's a general thing. And so what my urge is we need to be to see how we can, with big data, with digital, surfing new solutions on this. And the final is mobilizing private sector that needs to get in.
The bank has renewed its focus on capacity building, on knowledge for developing countries, and does original research. So if we connect that original research with what we need to do globally for transportation, is there anything from the research that you've seen, that you've been following, that your teams have brought to you, that you would like to share with us today that's relevant to our conference?
Well, what we have to learn is that transport you cannot impose. Transport will need to be owned in the community. And if there was an experience in Chile, that was in Santiago, there was a whole bus system that was to be transformed, and I was not consulted. And that backfired like royally. And the issue is there that we need to learn how we actually find solutions that are really carried on by the municipalities, by the people, so that basically people see the benefit, but also that we are listening to their concerns. It can be also, for example, for women, how we actually make sure that there is no violence against women. How do you respond to this? What are the options? And I think that sensitivity should be there. I think also what we need to see is when we do knowledge, I think with the knowledge bank, we are trying also to actually change this completely in a sense, not that you have new insights, but it is the engagement way. I was the other day in South Africa opening or launching an inclusive growth study with the finance minister and the transport minister, by the way. And it was about the way we did that together with think tank governments, and actually the product was the end result. It was not that you wrote it before and then you start consulting. It is the way you engage, and the interesting thing is it brings many more ideas out, but also the ownership is stronger and the partnership is also stronger for them, because they like that kind of exchanges with the bank, and we can then bring also different experiences across the globe, and that actually really enriches the discussion. This is also the chance for the whole transport folks here to see how we can be integrated into this specific transport solution, but never forgetting the overall picture for how we're working here together.
Axel, when I asked you about implementation, you said, I'm the aspirational person. So give us some aspiration. Yeah. Share it for the final thought.
Well, look, for me, the main thing, the challenge of the World Bank is, the biggest challenge ahead of it is in my mind, IDA, and particularly Africa. And there we need to bring all the strengths of the organization to make sure that actually we help transform the continent. A continent that has huge potential, has incredible, it's the youngest continent in terms of population, and what we need to do, how we can help. And there are many areas where we can help. Transport will be one. Last thing is, transport should not be seen only in urban transport. The continent is not well connected among the countries. There is a huge growth potential of integration. Europe has always benefited from integration. It gives a huge boost. Right now, transportation is still poor, from air transport to rail to road transportation. So those things we need to do. I think we need to see, similar to the M300, that initiative to connect 300 million Africans to electricity. It would be good, a whole initiative that connects the entire continent with transport. That is where we drive the change, and we can do it. And here I say, I have to stop and shut up. Thank you.
So, Van Trotzenberg, thank you for starting our program today. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to start our plenary for today via a video message which comes from the Executive Director of UN Habitat, so all the way from Nairobi right here to us in Washington, D.C. Anna Claudia Rosbach, ED of UN Habitat. Take a look at the video screen.
Distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends, it's my sincere pleasure to provide the keynote speech here today. Transport is the backbone of our cities, connecting communities and unlocking opportunities. Yet, for many, especially women, persons with disabilities, and marginalized communities, mobility remains a challenge. Transport must be safe, affordable, reliable, and accessible for all, ensuring no one is left behind. Technological innovation, urbanization, and climate change present both challenges and opportunities for inclusive transport. While these changes can transform mobility, they risk exacerbating inequalities if not managed with equity and justice in mind. Digital platforms, data-driven solutions, and emerging mobility services can diversify the workforce, breaking traditional barriers and expanding opportunities for underrepresented groups. Training is key, equipping women and other prioritized groups with the skills to thrive in the transport sector. However, technology alone is not enough. A truly inclusive transport future requires strong policies, supportive local governments, engaged communities, and impact-driven businesses, all working together to design transport systems that put people first. A good example of this is the Access project funded by the International Climate Initiative, where UN-Habitat partners with UNEP, the Wuppertal Institute, ITDP, ICLEI, and others. This project, spanning 6 Latin American countries, aims to integrate innovative policies and digital tools into urban transport to reduce emissions while ensuring equitable access for all. Access prioritizes gender inclusion, resilience, and safety, addressing challenges like harassment in public transport and the unique experiences of women in mobility. By strengthening local policy frameworks, the project takes a people-centered approach, ensuring that transport solutions are not just innovative, but also inclusive. During the 12th session of the World Urban Forum in Cairo, we explored planning cities with empathy in mind. An empathetic city listens, understands, and responds to all residents, celebrating the most marginalized. Inclusive transport is crucial to this vision. To create just, inclusive, and resilient transport, empathy must be a fundamental daily practice, not just a reactive response. We need cities that reflect the diverse realities of their inhabitants. True progress comes when mobility is dignified, humane, and rooted in social justice. Moreover, we must recognize that inclusive transport systems are closely connected to adequate housing in the context of transit-oriented development. People should not have to choose between affordable homes and access to jobs and services. Integrated planning that links transport with land use and housing policies can reduce urban sprawl, commuting times, and carbon emissions, creating a more sustainable, thriving, and inclusive communities. As we shape the future of transport, let us remember that inclusivity is the foundation, not an afterthought. Together, we can champion a just transition in transport, one that empowers communities, fosters equity, and ensures mobility is a right, not a privilege. Despite our different perspectives and experiences, we all have the power to care, act, and empathize. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce the plenary members for plenary number 4 to come on stage. We are going to be reshaping. Come on stage. I'm speaking South London. It's not translating. Welcome. The audience will applaud you as you come on stage. Please take a seat. You'll see your name tags, and you'll sit on the seat that is closest to your name tag. Thank you so much. Reshaping the future of transportation is our mission for the next hour. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to say hello to everybody. I'm going to give our audience your titles, and then you are going to introduce your name. Does that make sense? I'm going to partner up on how we do this together. All right. Visiting scholar from Harvard, Ines. Hello, welcome.
Hello, good morning. My name.
Please.
Okay.
It's early.
Yeah,
We'll get it together.
Easier if I say it. Inés Sánchez de Madariaga. I'm professor in the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. And this year, I'm a visiting scholar at Harvard University.
It's so good to have you. CEO of WRI India. Hello.
I'm Madhav Pai.
Hello, Madhav Pai.
Okay, so my name is Danola Lokeshusi. You can just call me Dami. Co-founder and CEO of Shuttlers.
Good to have you. Minister.
My name is Alhaji Fande Toure, Minister of Transport and Aviation for Sierra Leone.
Good to have you. And CEO and co-founder of Basigo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jit Bhattacharya, CEO of Basigo, headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, great. We are going to be talking about how innovation in the transport sector is going to help us get to delivering, driving solutions, implementing solutions in a better way. And I'm really curious to hear, and I know our audience will be curious to hear, about how you're innovating, Jit. Do you feel like you're an innovator?
Yeah, I think we are more than just an innovator. I think we're capitalizing on this incredible opportunity that's happening. I'm happy to share some background.
Please, go ahead.
So for those of you, many of you might be aware of Basigo, but for those of you who aren't, the opportunity that we are looking at is, as I think we can all acknowledge, public transport is still fundamental to mobility, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. A recent study by the Kenyan government found that 60% of the people living in Nairobi use a bus or a matatu every single day to get to and from work. On top of that, our bus sector is private sector. It's private sector driven. We have 20,000 buses in Nairobi. They are all privately owned. None of them are government. And this is still quite common throughout Africa. While we're seeing varying degrees where government is getting more involved, public-private partnerships, things like that, there's still a large private sector contingent. And the inspiration for Basigo actually came in April of 2020. We had this magical experience where very early in the COVID pandemic, the government stopped all the matatus from running for 3 days. And overnight, the air completely cleared, and we were able to see Mount Kenya 350 kilometers away behind the Nairobi skyline. Most of the people living in Nairobi, most of the Kenyans, forgot that you used to be able to see Mount Kenya almost every day from the city. And that showed us, we were given a glimpse of what would happen if we could clean up the public transport sector. And we have this amazing resource in Kenya. Over 90% of our electricity is already coming from clean, renewable energy. But more than that, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 in the morning, we have 800 gigawatt hours every year of surplus geothermal and wind energy going to waste that could be used to charge public transport buses. So this is the opportunity space that we found. I've been working in the e-mobility space for 20 years. And what we've seen in markets like Latin America, China, India, is that public transport buses is one of these sectors where actually EV can make competitive, can be directly competitive with the incumbent for a long time. And when we went through and did the analysis, we found that that was absolutely the case. Not only would an electric bus in Kenya mitigate 50 tons of CO2 per year, it could actually be more competitive than the diesel buses without government subsidies. And as somebody who's been working in climate change for a long time, this is exactly the kind of opportunity that I've been looking for so long. So what we're doing, our innovation, is we're bringing what we have seen in other markets work very well, a fleet as a service model to these private sector operators in Kenya in order to help them be able to afford an electric bus. Because if you ask them to buy it, there's no way with a high cost of capital and the cash sensitivity in our market that they would ever be able to afford it. But through a fleet as a service model, which we call pay as you drive, they're able to access an electric bus for a lower cash down payment. They triple their return on investment, and we're able to achieve the climate impact, modernizing public transport, offering dignified public transport that's accessible to all the people of Nairobi. So absolutely, I think we're an innovator because we've found this opportunity space and saw an opportunity for radical transformation.
Gee, I now know what it's like to be at one of your pitch meetings. That's phenomenal. I'll buy one.
Excellent.
Whatever it is.
You have your checkbook?
Minister, you were looking very thoughtful. I can tell you were leaning into what Jit was saying. What question did you have for him?
We were discussing the similar issue. We had a challenge for us in Sierra Leone. We're only starting now to introduce the cashless system. But then before then, we had series of leakages. And so I was just trying to ask him with technology to see how this can be brought forward, for us in Sierra Leone, so we can also tap from them. But Sierra Leone...
Can you ask that then? Because Jit's sitting right by. Are you allowed to tell him? Is this going to spoil your business model?
No, I'm happy to tell him. But I think this is what's going to be really exciting about this panel is I am working on one pillar of electrification, or one pillar of transport innovation right now, at least on the African continent. But what we're seeing is that there are a number of different areas of innovation. So one is electrification. Another one is really focused on connectivity and making the entire system smarter. The third is around digital payments and the transition away from cash. And so the ecosystem is transforming very quickly on multiple fronts all at once. And I think you're going to hear that across the panel.
And that is where exactly we are. We have just started that, but we have some challenges. Maybe for Sierra Leone, before today, we had a transport system which was informal. And then the population as well has grown so large. And so there is, the public transport system is very much unregulated. And to do that, we have now started the process of having, firstly, a regulatory framework, which we have already put in place. And to do that, we have a company. But before coming to the company, we have a government agency which is now responsible to regulate all these informal transport sector. So they have now started putting measures in place, including this cashless system, which I was just talking about. So we are moving slowly. We have just started, but with the support of the World Bank, we are moving forward. So we only have one company at the moment, which is running the public transport, but it is a public-private partnership model which we are using.
Damilola.
Yes.
You are innovating in the transport space. Tell us how you're doing it.
So as Shuttlers, we provide a scheduled bus sharing and car sharing service to daily commuters. For those of you that don't know Nigeria or Lagos, Nigeria has a population of over 200 million people. And Lagos, where I live, has a population of 20 million people. And for the 8 million daily commuters that drive to work or use public transport, most of them spend at least 2 hours trying to get to work. And the idea for Shuttlers came when so 2016, I just got employed in an engineering firm as a young graduate, as a young chemical engineering graduate. I was in the dire need to provide a solution that I could use and I could control the safety conditions in the buses. My sister was a victim of, robbery in buses called Danfo. And I realized that a lot of my colleagues, female colleagues, have similar experiences. And as I continued to use the public transport, I became very, very, anxious and I wanted to create something that I could use and my family members could use, my friend could use. Mm-hmm. And this was where the idea came from, to find, operators that are, had clean buses, trained drivers. We could partner with them, operate them in a scheduled manner that people can predict when they will get to work, make that service available on our app where people can book the rides in advance, even 1 month in advance, and they can shuttle to and from work. And now people that use our service, over 50% of them own cars, and they're able to carpool and bus pool through our platform. And we contribute to, either reducing the traffic congestion or, carbon emission in the atmosphere.
Do you have, I was going to say something like proof of concept, but other than the people who are using the app, is there anything else that's telling you, this is going well, this is the right direction, I really am innovating in transport?
We are in over 300 routes in Lagos. There's a metric that we track on our app, which is attempted bookings. And we find that only a fraction of people that search for routes are able to find seats. So we have a supply problem, right? We have more demand than supply. Because to find quality buses at a price that our customers are able to pay for, because our service is 60 to 80% cheaper than ride-hailing services, slightly about 10% higher than public transport, because we're targeting those that drive private cars. And so the trick is, to find affordable assets. So the metric that helps us to, confirm that we are solving a huge problem is that we have more demand than supply, and we're able to track that metric on our app.
Ines, you come to our conversation with a particular kind of expertise. Would you summarize it for us? Because then I'd like you to talk to Damilola about her innovation through the lens that you bring to our conversation.
Yes, well, I work on women's issues in transportation and city planning, also in housing, anything related to the built environment, of which transport is a key aspect. And a few years ago, for a work that I was asked to do by our Spanish Ministry of Transportation, they asked me to do a gender analysis of transportation statistics that were produced in Spain at the time. That was 2008. And I did that. I identified a number of biases and omissions of women's ways of traveling. And when I had finished it, I realized that it was like something that came, a light bulb in my head, like an illumination, that the standard categories that are used by transportation agencies around the world, standard like employment, work, education, shopping, strolling, visits, escorting, and black box others, that really many of the trips that were happening, that happened for the purposes of visiting, escorting, shopping, strolling, are really trips that people, statistically women, do for the purpose of having the household work and having people who don't have autonomy to move alone around the city go to where the places they have to go, like schools or doctors or anything that the young, the elderly, or the sick have to do in the city. And so I had this idea of naming these trips mobility of care, or care-related trips, because care is a key concept that has been used to understand all the tasks that people do for the reproduction of life, for the support of life, for daily life to happen in smooth ways, basically. And so I had this idea of creating this analytical framework, this conceptual framework, but also a category that can be used in technical terms as a purpose for travel by when we collect data. And by naming those trips with this umbrella category, we can make them visible. This way we change our viewpoint or how we understand in broad terms the transportation systems and how people use them and the needs of people. So we can make them visible, and we can also quantify them. And I published this in a toolkit by the European Commission and the University of Stanford called Gendered Innovations. And this had a broad impact, then also by the IADB and many others around the world. And so it's demonstrating to be a quite useful way to understand women's ways of traveling and their needs, and that very much complement the issue of safety. Before that, safety was like a key issue, and it is a very important issue for women. But we also need to look at what are the specific ways of movement. So that's what the mobility of care as an innovation, a conceptual innovation, provides for transport policymakers.
So thinking, don't be shy. Thinking about the mobility of care, what would you want to ask Damilola and what would you want to ask Jit? Are they creating mobilities of care?
Well, yes, that's, I would like, because you have mentioned the issue of safety, which is key for women, because this mobility of care, it has to be safe. But it also has to relate to the movements that women do and what they, and the trips that they do not do, because there's no possibility, the immobilities. For instance, we did a few years ago for UN Habitat, we did a study of the Matatu system in Nairobi, and we found that women did on average one trip more than men, that this trip was done for care purposes, and it was as long as the trips done for work. So this totally changes the understanding of the needs of men and women. It's very different. In Spain, we did this analysis and we found that men, the trips that men do for between 30 and 45 years, of their trips, they only do 9% for care purposes, while women do over 40 of their trips are for care purposes. So it's a huge sex difference.
So, Minister, you're just right at the beginning of thinking about your future of transport. So that mobility of care, did that resonate with you?
Thank you for that question. I think it would be good for me to also share our experience insofar as gender is concerned. For us, I mean, this pertains to especially the bus drivers and conductors. So we wanted to train female drivers because Sierra Leone, most of the drivers are mainly male drivers. And so for inclusivity purposes, we also decided that we should have female drivers. Fast forward, we advertised for female drivers, and you couldn't believe we had only 5 that came forward. And out of the 5, when eventually wanted to start the training, there was none. Reason being, firstly, is because the safety issue, which Professor was talking about, because there is this culture that, I mean, if they drive the buses, maybe they would be intimidated, and because it's not a common practice in Africa or in Sierra Leone in particular to have women driving public transport. And so we decided to change from the formal way of advertising for jobs, and then we decided to go through gender outfits within the country. So we went through them, telling them that we need female drivers to be able to come on board for training. And
can I, just so we can imagine it, how did you do that? How did you tell women that we would like to recruit you as drivers? So what was the messaging like?
Yeah, so we sent a message that we needed drivers.
What was the, was it on a text?
And then women are encouraged to come forward for the training, yes.
Okay.
So once we did that, nothing much, we didn't receive most of them. And then we went through the gender outfit, told them about it. And then because of the kind of trust they had with the gender outfits, they were able to speak to them, the gender ministry, and also other outfits. They were able to convince them that, hey, this is good, it's good for you to come. So they gave them the assurance insofar as security was concerned. So, and then after that, we received hundreds of them came forward. And now I'm happy to let you know that we even received more than the number of female drivers we wanted. That is over 500. But we had to also put the requirement up so that we can reduce the number of drivers. So that worked very well for us.
How many female drivers do you have now?
Currently, we have only 1 driving, but then the training would soon finish in the next 3 months. So we would have more drivers, more than the number of buses that we have. So we will be coming back to the World Bank for more support.
Have you been on the bus that's driven by the female driver?
Oh, yes. Sierra Leone, in fact, statistics in Sierra Leone, and I guess all over the world, shows that female drivers tend to be better insofar as driving is concerned than the male drivers. So, and it is really working because
data is very important.
No, and female conductors are in higher revenue as well.
Yes, with the buses that we have, the female driver that is driving her bus, till today, it's almost a year, not a single accident from this female driver, the single driver. But with the other drivers, of course.
Jit, we can't talk about innovation without talking about tech, and you bring the tech to our conversation. Can you explain what you're doing that helps us look at the future of transportation? Because for you, the future is right now.
No, you talked, we talked about data today with
Excuse me.
It's fine. With geospatial, with computer vision, with AI, you are able to really democratize data. So what we are trying to do is 3 things: build open source, find a way to let co-creation happen through convenings and discussions that are public in nature, and really allow the market and the community to build on top, right? And I'll give you two examples. One, which is very relevant to what Jit and Dami talked about. India about 10 years ago did the unified payment interface, right? Which really enabled peer-to-peer digital payments by creating a standard or a protocol. This is like the internet protocol, right? They created this standard and protocol to allow banks for individuals to transact through their bank accounts. We're trying to do this, build a DPI for transport. So any vehicle location device, any payment device, any battery device, any charging device, can we set the standards and protocols? These are like Lego blocks that someone like Jit can then use to build on top, right? Simple examples. Today, if a bank that wants to lend to an electric bus, if they can see the battery health data, they can tell the life of the sort of end of life cost, they can actually give you better interest rates. And we have seen amazing innovation come in India when we did the payments, right? Language was a barrier, somebody put a voice box. OTP was there, somebody just found a way to get it automatically uploaded. So we really believe that if we want to allow interoperability, there are these 4 device data, payments, location, battery charging. If we can build the standards and protocols, it will unleash the market to be able to build on top of that, right? So that's sort of one idea. The other thing that, and why I'm saying also now geospatial analytics, computer vision, AI is allowing. So I'll talk to you about some work we are doing in the temple city of Varanasi. They just sort of redid the temple there. And in 2 years, the number of visitors have gone from 13 million to 130 million visitors a day. And this is leading to extreme crowding. So now, using like imagery, we've been able to train a bird counting algorithm because facial recognition doesn't work because the crowds are so high. And have developed standards to say that, once you go past 6 pedestrians per meter square, it's stampede-like conditions. So how can we use computer vision to generate this kind of data to be able to trigger warnings of when crowding situations get into stampede situations? How can we then use urban design and other strategies to manage? And again, the idea is not for us to do it, right? But for us to build the methodology for assessing pedestrians and crowding, which really is missing from our ecosystem, bring this data using this sort of computer vision AI, but then also get a set of innovators to actually start, building the solutions or building the tech that is required then to trigger the warnings and things like that. So I think and then finally, I think with geospatial analytics, and this is something we did in Bangalore very recently, about 2 weeks ago, was we built an open source platform called Shift Transport. The idea is to use OSM data, and we've done it for about 25 cities, and it's very easy to do. So you can basically, really create like these 20-foot, 40-foot panels of mobility in your city with visualization. And we created a public exhibition. Some 10,000 people came, bureaucrats came, politicians came, we had media. And we were able to talk about complex transport systems in a much more nuanced way than you would actually do when we're trying to sort of explain it. So once people are able to see the visuals, they're able to see why certain parts of the city are getting stuck, why they're not, and then the dialogue sort of builds. Now we've built this in a way that local communities can take this data and create these exhibitions. So you create these large discourse spaces. B, actually young students, etc., can actually start to build more data into this, more data about demand, how, about transport demand, more data on how sort of supply functions, and really talk about performance and change the discourse. Even today, most of the discourse in our cities is traffic, congestion, building double-decker flyovers, triple-decker flyovers. Nobody's really talking about last mile connectivity. Nobody's talking about how women move, and nobody's talking about these stampede-like situations. How do we make this mainstream? So I think the idea is to use these technologies that are available, but also create the space for dialogue and discourse and for everybody to build together. So
that's a mindset issue, isn't it? It's a mindset challenge. How do you change that?
Well, I mean, the first thing is to start actually getting people engaged in deeper conversations, right? So getting media in was very useful because they're not experts and they find it very hard when experts like us speak. So I think using visualization, using these more immersive techniques to bring them to the conversation really then also helps with the mindset changing. And I think finding a place for community to participate in these things also allows some of this mindset changing to happen.
I have another perspective on how we can get that mind shift change, and that is market driven. So one of the things I think we're hearing, especially, going back to what you were talking about, Inez, one of the things that I feel like we're seeing is the public transport sector in a market like Africa has been ossified. There's been no innovation. There's been very little change. I was actually speaking with a student group from Kenya last week, and I was asking them, you remember the matatus you used to ride in the 90s? How much have those changed in the last 34 years? And they say, hardly at all, hardly at all. Meanwhile, the internet has changed, the phones have changed, the rest of their life has changed, but their public transport has not changed 1 ounce in almost 34 years. So this is what we're seeing now we're in a period of radical transformation, whether it's through electric, whether it's through payments, whether it's through data and becoming a lot more smart about how the routes need to work. All of these are coming together in order to create a brand new public transport experience, one that's much more on demand. It's cleaner, it's more comfortable, it's connected, it's achieving all of these things that we wanted to, and it's happening very, very fast. And what's driving that? Well, one of the craziest things that we saw when we launched our first 2 electric buses in March 2022, something we did not expect. We put these on the road, they're just competing as regular matatus. As you know, we don't have bus schedules in Nairobi. Buses go to a queue. They have to stand at a stage in a queue, and the bus at the front fills, and then it goes. Passengers would get out of the diesel buses at the front of the queue, go backward in line 4 or 5 buses to get onto our electric bus. Because it was more comfortable, because it was connected, because they could charge their phone. And what did we find? The mindset shift is happening by passenger demand. They are demanding this. It's then resulting in higher revenues for the bus operators. It's then resulting in putting 862 deposits with us. It's market driven. So I think that's one way we can make it happen.
Inez, go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is a kind of way of demonstrating things. We call this similar way of promoting changes through pilot projects. I would say this is like a bit of an equivalent because you show a different way of doing things. And by showing a different way of doing things in a demonstrative, illustrative example, people see this is a better thing and we want that. So this is like the idea of the role models that we use so much when we want to promote women's participation. For instance, your bus drivers and so on, then you give them prize as you have done in India, recognizing women in the transportation sectors by giving them prizes, make them visible. And so this encourages and contributes very significantly to change. This is like the demonstrative effect. This is a very powerful way of contributing to more inclusive transport systems or anything in planning by demonstrating how the participation of women or how a particular project serves better the needs of women. We have done that. This is a different field, like in housing. Yeah, very much so. I would like also to mention in relation to the issue of data and technologies, another key aspect for women is affordability, because women have much lower economic resources than men. And in India, you have this very interesting experience of having free buses in a few cities for women, which I think is contributing very significantly to have a very positive impact on women's access to jobs and education, for instance. So pricing systems that improve affordability and also lessen the price of trip chaining and transfers, which is another very typical way of moving by women, and how the integration of pricing systems across the multiple modes of transportation, those are key issues that should very much benefit from the use of systems that you were describing. Maybe you can contribute to that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the city of Delhi and also the state of Karnataka, they basically made buses free for women. And we're starting to see early results, but really in the lowest income, it is allowing them, women which were going 5 kilometers are now going 15 kilometers. And that is increasing their access to education, their opportunities. There is a lot of resistance to this idea of making it free, but clearly from a inclusion of women in society perspective, especially on the lowest income groups, it is showing dramatic results.
Where's the resistance coming from making it free? From the operators?
No, because it's publicly run. So, it's publicly run. So it's really what it costs the exchequer. And so, it's a welfare scheme, if you want to call it. But if we are able to then, I think then the responsibility is ours to show the economic benefits and the economic opportunities doing this creates, right? The bus service in Bangalore, for example, if you actually, there was a clear increase in ridership, of overall ridership, because now more women are accessing the system. If you actually count for the fares these women would have paid, that service is now profitable. Now, how do we account for it is actually economics, right? And so I think that is something that it's good, and I think it can be designed better. There are a lot of women who can afford, are not using this, using the free service and are asking to pay. So I think if we build the right communication, if we create the right sort of messaging, then it works. Now, one more point I'll make. I mean, I think on the previous, you asked me how, I mean, I talked about this event and I talked about how do we engage. So, we also, I mean, the other thing that we were able to do is we got the auto rickshaw driver women on stage, right? We got people who run, a lot of people, there are a lot of enthusiasts that run, bus. These are bus geeks, right? They run bus route apps and, user groups on WhatsApp. We gave them stage. They created a quiz for the city to participate on how buses operate in the city. So I think creating these voices will also help us to sort of creating the space really to help these voices to come in front. And that's the point that Ines was also making. I think will also help us drive some of this change.
Sure. Minister, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to touch a bit on the aspect of mindset. Just to share our experience again, for Sierra Leone, I mean, for us to be able to change the mindset, what we came up with is the policy aspect. So we used policy to be able to change the mindset. Again, we are just growing. Sierra Leone is just growing slowly insofar as formal or informal transportation is concerned. So what the policy is, what we did is we have a policy titled Radical Inclusion. So what this radical inclusion seems to look at is to be able to see those individuals that have been excluded. And these include, for example, disabled who cannot board public buses. These include students that are at the far end of the country and have no access to public transport, or even if they do, because they are disabled, they will not be able to board those public transport. So it wasn't working. So as a government policy now, we have changed that completely. So with the buses, for example, within the urban area, we have ensured that those buses have the facilities that goes especially for disabled. So they are able to board those buses and go to work. And the same applies as well to the public transport as well, to be able to not only travel within the urban areas, but between the urban and the rural areas, thereby creating the environment for economic development.
I'm going to open up the room for questions. Please stand behind the microphone either at the back of the room or towards the middle of the room. Don't leave it to the last minute because we have another speaker in this session. So get on the microphone as quickly as you can. I am going to start online though. I have an online question and you kind of addressed this. So I'm going to bounce it back just so that we get the absolutely definitive answer. How do we make the business case that investing in safe and accessible transport options results in economic benefit for all, including transport operators?
Well, that's a very easy question for us to answer, at least in the East African context. In the East African context right now, there is a push from public sector now all the way down to private sector in order to accelerate electrification. And it's all driven by the fact that electric is more competitive than diesel. What has changed that's made that happen? Of course, technology costs has come down, but another important thing has happened in the last 2 years. And that is ever since the war in Ukraine broke out, as well as US interest rates began to rise in 2022, most African countries have had to remove fuel subsidies. So we are now operating on a level playing field. We don't have additional subsidies in markets like Kenya. We have some small subsidies in Rwanda, but we don't have additional subsidies in Kenya. But because we're operating on a level playing field, the electric buses are far more economical. Not only that, from the public sector side, every electric bus we put on the road is reducing imports of diesel fuel by 20,000 liters per year. That is preserving foreign exchange, that's helping improve the economy, helping bring currency stability, while also improving the net economics for the bus operators by a huge margin. And this is why right now, for us, we have 862 deposits on our reservation list from private bus operators. It's going to take us 3 years to deliver against this back order list right now because of the benefits to them.
Wow, Damilola, your thoughts?
Yes. So one interesting thing about our business model is that we're asset light. We don't own the buses. We have about 350 vehicles on our platform, and 70% of them are 28-seater buses, and 30% of them are vans and cars. What we promise the 160 bus operators on our platform is that we would help them guarantee their revenue monthly. What we then do in return is to sell those seats in advance to companies and to professionals. We have contracts to companies that can pay per seat and individuals that can book in advance to assure the operators of their revenue. Where a private, company, we're not subsidized by the, by any financier. We have venture funding, so we need to ensure that buses on the road are profitable. So what we promise our bus operators is that they'll be able to make revenue on our platform.
Mm-hmm.
One sentence, Femi, on this.
Yeah.
So India is going to do 80,000 buses.
Yeah.
I think Jit is indicating the demand that is coming from Africa. We are at the World Bank. We need to unlock serious international finance for us to actually move on the electrification journey. The money that is there today is not enough. So at the interest rates that are affordable and right, this is a huge opportunity to unlock finance.
Minister, you had a thought too.
Yeah, just to add to what my brother said here. For Sierra Leone, I think it's helping us. Firstly, the commuters. Before today, from one point to the other, they used to take like 2 or 3 public buses to get to their location. But with the World Bank project, which we implemented with the 50 buses, now they are paying half of that because the buses are taking the individuals or the commuters from one point to the other for half that price. And also infrastructure. So clearly, because we are going to have more buses, more bus stops, and more other opportunities are rising, thereby giving them a lot of income.
Ines, briefly, did you want to add something?
Yeah, very shortly. We have a technique, gender impact statements of projects that can be used, for instance, in the case that we were talking about before of public operators in India. What are the spillover positive effects, not just on transporters, but on the economy of having this particular measure taken up for a while, maybe under certain conditions, that certainly has a positive overall economic effect from a wider understanding.
Okay, great. I'm going to take several questions all in one go. Good morning. at the front of the mic.
Can you all hear me? Is this okay? I'm Emma McLennan. I'm the Director General of EAST, the Eastern Alliance for Safe and Sustainable Transport. We work in 15 countries, mainly Central Asia, South Caucasus, Eastern Europe, Baltics, states, and the Balkans. I love the concept of the mobility of care that Ines proposed. I would also say there's another concept, which is the mobility of autonomy, because people being cared for, people with disabilities, are autonomous human beings. Our organization has done some surveys in different countries and have found that people with disabilities with skills are unable to get employment because they have no mobility. And this is really important economic consideration as in addition to an equity consideration. So my question for the panel is, how do we ensure good stakeholder engagement so that people with disabilities, I'm glad, Ines, you mentioned people with low incomes, are part of the planning process, are actually consulted and their needs are taken into consideration, because I think that's a vital thing. By the way, I'm so pleased to hear the words inclusion, equity, and gender.
You are such a troublemaker.
I am. I'm also from London, so there you go.
I knew it. Thank you, Emma. Please take a seat. I'm going to take several questions. We will get to that one straight away. Hello, good morning. What is your question?
Good morning. I'm Cecilia Briceño Garmendia, lead economist from the World Bank Transport. And thank you very much to all panelists and Doctora Ines Sanchez de Madariaga. Thank you for bringing the demand side of the story so clearly, the importance of these transversal, invisible heroes that are caregivers, and which cuts across gender, cut across age, cut across income level. And I think that is the way that we reshape the future of transport. I have no question, just comment. Thank you.
Good job you didn't tell me that at the beginning. Thank you for your statement. If you have a statement, please sit down. We're doing statements in the coffee break.
All right. I did not have a question, right?
No. That was beautiful. Please take a seat. Beautiful, beautiful, lovely. Take a seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia Driasol Style with WRI. I just love this conversation, the future of transport, and all the future is public transport with gender, cleaning air. So I really love how you are seeing that future. One thing that you haven't discussed is demand management, because if we really want to run public transport and not have people so delay in public transport, we need to clear a little bit the road. So any thoughts about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, yes. I was curious how freight transport plays into this, especially in somewhere like Freetown's hillsides, where you have a lot of small businesses, often owned, operated by women, being able to access goods and transport goods up hillsides that may not be accessible. That's a critical issue, and I'm curious how that's been dealt with.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more for now. Hello, sir.
Hello, I'm Dr. Harsh Verma, a founder and CEO of PeopleSense.ai, coming from California. And crowding is a problem everywhere, even in California, where sometimes there are buses moving with very few people in it. However, there is a challenge of crowding. And it was really nice to hear from the panelists talk a little bit about it. I'd like to hear a little bit more on more experiences and, you know, the innovation. So we are looking at a lot of innovation for addressing the challenges of crowding and also impacting demand-based transportation. So that's a little comment and a question also for
All right.
request for
Thank you very much. I'm going to get to these four and then we're going to see what time it is. And then if I've got more time, please come back to the microphone right at the front of the microphone. Thank you, gents. All right. Crowding. Who wants to address crowding? Damilola, when you were saying the numbers in Lagos, I was like, yes, my city. Remind people how many people are in Lagos.
20 million.
All right, so let's talk about crowding.
Yes. Okay.
How do you deal with that?
So what we've done to ensure that we're able to run an efficient system is that we have a pre-booking solution. Our service runs on schedule. We're the only transport company in Lagos that you can find our booking on an app, and you can predict when we're going to arrive and when we're going to depart. And the whole operation works as if it's like the army. We have a monitoring team that ensures that, in fact, we brought the innovation from the airline industry into the bus industry in a way that when you're trying to book an airline ticket, you can predict when the flight is going to happen. You can you can find your seats, you can do all of those things. That's what we are bringing into the bus sector as well, in a way that people can book their seats in advance, and so that we will not have any crowding situation. And also bus operators can also predict their income on the buses as well.
Okay, thank you. Freight transport in Sierra Leone, Minister, briefly, what do you have to say about that?
What was the question about freight transport?
The future of freight transport in Sierra Leone, how important it was. I'll come back to you. Because it was quite a detailed question. Let me just see. The gentleman who asked it, please stand up.
It's about the hillsides. It's about hillsides and how do you get freight to people living on hillsides.
Great, thank you. We got it.
He was talking about Freetown.
Freetown. I've always said freight.
Was it Freetown?
Freight in Freetown.
Freight in Freetown.
Freight transport in Freetown on the hillside.
Do it again on the microphone. I'm sorry. My note taking is incomplete.
So, freight transport on hillsides in Freetown, I think, is a good example of where there are specific issues with that, especially given the lack of paved roads or else accessibility, especially in heavy weather events, and being able to reliably get to shops, such.
Yeah, I get it.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. Again, we very much appreciate the World Bank, the support that they gave. So what we did initially was to do an assessment of urban transportation. So we were able to, from the studies, it became apparent that we needed about 300 buses. Now, to be able to use those 300 buses, it will cater for all of those routes, including what the gentleman just talked about. But then, because of funding opportunities, we were able to get funding for only 50 buses. And therefore, we had to use, instead of using 2 or 3 routes, including the route which the gentleman was talking about, we are only able to use one of those routes. But the good news is that we are currently conducting surveys. So the survey is already done, and then we will be having the report very soon. And part of it, I believe, will cover the hillside that he was talking about.
You believe? You believe it will?
Yes, I'm very confident.
Oh, you're very confident?
Yes, I'm very confident because
I like
that's
the second answer.
That's one of the routes which they will be using.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Appreciate that. Demand management.
Yeah, I think demand management, this is also related a little bit to crowding, but I'm going to talk about crowding in a different sense, which is more crowding on the roads in general, because we heard this earlier in Axel's speech as well, right? The population in Africa is going to be doubling by 2050. In Nairobi, we're currently a population of 5 million, much smaller than Lagos. And yet we're already anticipating what's going to happen in the next 20 years. Nairobi is going to become a megacity. It's going to have over 10 million people. And already the streets of Nairobi even with a very low motorization rate. So very few people have private passenger cars in Nairobi, and yet the city is at a standstill. The vast majority of people use buses, and yet the city is at a standstill. So one of the things that we constantly talk about, we're a climate mission company. We are in this for climate impact, and yet there's a climate impact of moving from a diesel bus to an electric, but there's an even bigger climate impact that we talk about all the time. And that is, as the city grows, if we can create clean, comfortable, connected, more convenient public transport, we can get the young, emerging middle class out of passenger cars and into a bus. And frankly, that's the only way that you see real sustainable development for a city like Nairobi, and not just Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Kigali, Lagos, all over the continent. Public transport has to be a priority, but it has to be convenient and competitive with the alternative.
Ines, we had that question about DEI that came from Emma, and she wanted to know about, or the point about consulting people who have particular requirements when they're using public transport, whether there be people with disabilities, people who have lower incomes, and she liked the way that you were already thinking about that. What guidance can you give her? How would you answer Emma's question?
Well, there are a number of, I'm sure she knows that a number of organizations that represent people with disabilities. For instance, in the UN, World Enabling and the World Blind Union are very active participants in all the processes in which, well, we just heard ED Ana Claudia Rosbach from UN Habitat. They are very active, these organizations, in all the processes in the UN environment. At the national level in Spain, for instance, we have the ONCE, which is the National Association of the Blind. It started as blind people, but it also includes people with other disabilities, and it's an incredibly effective organization in terms of advocating and being interlocutors with governments in all sorts of policies, legislation, all kinds of public policy. I think it's a very good example of what the question was asking of, a very good good practice of how to do it at the national level. So we have the two places, national and international. These two can be very representative. In terms of crowding, that's very important for women in transportation. We know this in India. Subways in India, or Mexico City, for instance, in the great cities, in the metro, which has led, in the case of Mexico City, for instance, to the separate trains for women. And the issue of how this relates to harassment in public transportation is something that has to be thought and addressed in various ways, including education and other means. But it's very relevant for women too.
Panel, I want you to think about either scaling up odd jobs as your final thought. What we've talked about, how can we do that globally or even regionally? And does that result in more jobs? Minister.
So from my part, I think with all what we have said here, clearly it will result to having more jobs, because the focus has to be having transport system which is safe, which is reliable, and which is affordable. And in doing so, I think you have to spend as much as you can, because there's nothing you can pay more than the safety or the lives of an individual. And that is why for us, especially in Sierra Leone, with the buses that we have, or with the public transport system, they are being monitored closely, such that the individuals that go in there are safe, and that gives them the confidence for them to travel those buses, especially women and children as well, and the aged. And so with all of that, there'll be a lot of public-private partnership and of course, eventually will lead to having more jobs and then more income.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Madhav.
So one, I mean, just again, in India, we've done, if we go and achieve the net zero targets that India set itself, it says that we can create 1 to 3 million more jobs and almost deliver 1.5 to 2% higher on GDP. A lot of these jobs will come from transport. And then the other huge factor is the women participation in the workforce in urban areas is at 20%. And, so how do we really build systems that enable this number to double? And that will just, the access to jobs will create the economic access to economic opportunities and more participation in the workforce.
Thank you. Ines.
Yes, well, I think that facilitating the integration of women in the workforce, in the transportation workforce, is another key issue because it has a very low participation of women across the world in all the different parts of the transportation system, and then facilitating the way that women can access transportation will also be a key aspect for improving the overall participation of women into the labor force, as we have just heard, particularly in India, which is so low. But even in countries in which it's higher, it's very important that the care elements are addressed so that the participation in the labor force can be increased.
Damilola.
So by design, we focus more on daily workers, whether it's blue collar workers or white collar workers. We want them to think less of the troubles of trying to get from work to home. And so we help them design that experience end to end. So on that end, we help, workers get to work, very productive. On the other end, we also help a number of companies access employment every day. 160 companies rely on us to provide them revenue through our platform. Over 300 drivers, gain revenue through our platform as well. We have bus marshals, bus assistants, female and male, that earn revenue on our platform as well. And so imagine a small startup like us that has over 300 vehicles, and we have about 700 people that rely on us every day. Imagine scaling that up, 2x, 5x, 10x of that as we expand to other African countries, expand within Nigeria as well, the impact that will make. Other startups are also, growing up with that through, EV innovations or CNG gas innovations, the effect and ripple effect of that will make, for job employment in Africa. Yeah.
Anjit, thank you.
So one of the things to remember for sub-Saharan Africa, we are primarily a used vehicle import market. 80 to 90% of the vehicles coming into sub-Saharan Africa are being imported secondhand. When you make the shift to electric, one of the exciting things is that secondhand vehicles become much less competitive because the batteries are now dying in those secondhand vehicles. So we actually have an opportunity for green industrialization, manufacturing jobs. So for example, in Kenya, we have set up the first local assembly line for modern electric buses, and we're assembling them. In order to be competitive with the incumbent, we actually have to locally assemble. So when you look at this shift to electric, a lot of people don't realize how many jobs it can create. We actually estimate it's between 10 and 12 for every bus we deploy, 10 to 12 direct and indirect jobs across manufacturing, across deployment and management of the charging infrastructure, across brand new service and maintenance operations throughout the ecosystem. So just the shift to electric actually is a huge green industrialization opportunity.
So, Plenary, listening in to this conversation about reshaping the future of transport is the Vice President and Regional Director for Europe at WRI, Stinja van Verhoeven. Stinja, it's really good to have you here. You've been listening in. Stinja will appear just behind us. My favorite word is inshallah.
And yeah, I can see myself here.
Welcome to Transforming Transportation, the 22nd edition, with you, Stinja, appearing virtually. Listening into the conversation, what leapt out at you? What resonated? Because you've done so much regarding transforming transportation in your career, in your experience. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, you must have been super excited, like I was, listening to all of the panels and the questions. I think the main takeaway is shifts are happening, right? We are driving that change. But of course, I was super excited to hear, basically, as we see renewable energies are outperforming fossil, we also see e-buses outperforming diesel. And we are seeing women outperforming men in road safety. So I think there's a few good highlights here that we can work with in order to drive further change. So the question now is, I think, how do we put that on steroids? Of course, a particular look towards the World Bank already in ensuring enough finance, but of course, much more is needed. I think we are all needed to put that movement on steroids. And I think on the point of women outperforming men in road safety. There's a saying in Dutch, and it's always incredibly dangerous to translate sayings, but it says, "A gentleman in traffic is often a woman." And I think that is one that we might translate quite literally here. So yes, and how can we harness that potential more? Also, a reflection on jobs. Yes, and I think it's actually, if you think about it, it's so logical, right? If we know how to harness the talents and availability of half of the world population better, of course it's going to generate growth, right? Of course it's going to generate jobs. So definitely something that's connected also to transport. And then so many elements connected to this, right? Wanting to put this on steroids, procurement is going to be key, governments are going to be key, smart policies are going to be key, new technologies are going to be key. And actually, in preparation for this session, where new technologies and innovation are, of course, at the heart of the discussion, I decided to ask AI what it would say. How could technology and innovation drive change? And of public transport definitely came out on top. So I think that's very clear. But what also comes out is that demand management, something that the panel and the room also touched on, is also key. And if we think about demand management, there's two aspects, right? There's the aspect that was very much highlighted also in the panel of, let's say, the risk of congestion, and that by even if you have 100 electric vehicles, they can still cause a lot of congestion. They won't cause as much air pollution, but it's still bad for your economic development. If you can actually develop comfortable, sustainable transport systems that allows you to make much more economic use of the scarcity of space in a city. My career, when I was responsible for transport policy in the Netherlands, I calculated at some point how much space does a bike take on the road versus a car, and the ratio was 1 to 26. So it gives you a sense of how much more efficient use you can have in a crowded city, and less congestion is better for economic growth, is better for jobs. We all know it. But this also points to a topic which I heard less about in the panel: active mobility, cycling and walking. Most of the disadvantaged groups use most of these modalities too. So how do we also make sure that while focusing on comfortable, safe and accessible public transport and affordable public transport, we also make sure that that mobility that so many people in the developing world are still reliant on is much safer than it is today, because it is still very unsafe, and we need to also solve that if we want to harness, let's say, those questions that women in their daily journeys actually face. I think ensuring more road safety is actually one which is also very key. And then final, maybe, if we think about technology, which is absolutely key, and I think the panel highlighted also some very smart ways of harnessing technology, both for cleaning up transport, but also for increasing safety of transport, especially for women. Sometimes we also just need to look at technology outside of the transport sector. And sometimes that's high tech in the sense of mobile money systems and data-driven platforms to inform the most efficient use of investment. Sometimes it is also very low tech that you need to unlock a particular situation. And an example there, also trying to attract female bus drivers in Colombia, a project that WRI has been working on under the E2Me projects, was actually just make sure that there was a toilet for women to go to, which was safe as part of their working day. So sometimes we also really need to focus on what does the actual journey look like for both a woman using transport, or a person with disabilities using transport, or somebody wanting to work in transport, to make sure that we really think through what their journey looks like and what elements would support them in that journey. And the same goes, of course, for all of the informal workers in the transport sector. How do we make them part of this these shifts that are happening, and how do we enable them also to be partners in us driving change. So just a few things that really jumped out to me, and I got really excited about the opportunities and the possibilities here. I'm sure you did too. I'd be happy to elaborate on any of the aspects, because I mean, about this for hours, but I know time is scarce.
Your team are taking photographs of the screen, Stinger, so they obviously appreciate the comments that you've been making so far. I'm going to ask you to do one thing, which is tap back into your former experience as a politician, because we're asking about driving solutions, making change happen, and focusing on implementation. What did you find was your secret sauce for making great ideas, innovative ideas actually happen?
Well, maybe very contrary to what people might think, for a politician, I actually think that your ears are more important than your mouth. It's getting all of the impacted people, all of the people that need to be connected to a solution, and the solution is often a real solution, an innovative solution, a new solution. Often means changing the current, and that means that people will be impacted in positive or negative ways. Make sure to get all those people connected to the development of these ideas, involve the communities, involve also those that face negative consequences, might see their business models change. How do you bring all of those people on board, listening to them, listening to where their worries are, where their concerns are, but also where the opportunities are, and try to define your policy in such a way that you can make them your allies. And just as a little example, we were facing a lot of congestion. It's been one of the biggest problems in the metropolitan area, which is most of the west of the Netherlands. And we had forever been trying to solve that congestion by putting more roads in place, more asphalt. That was kind of the basic solution to solve congestion for a little while, and then it would just clog up again. And then at some point, we start to reflect on how can longer distance active mobility actually play a role in a flat country like the Netherlands. With an e-bike, 15 to 20 kilometers by bike is a daily commute, which is actually pretty easy to do, provided the infrastructure is good. And actually by aligning ourselves with the business community, getting a campaign, let's say, in the air that said, if you don't need to be on the road, please get off, so that we can make transport for those companies that have no alternative, for people that have no alternative, to use the road more efficiently. We were able to kind of reduce the use of the road, so to do demand management while stimulating active mobility, but with maybe a set of unusual allies actually to advocate for cycling as a solution to unlock a situation with lots of congestion. So it's listening, and it's finding those maybe unusual alliances that can help to move certain policies forward.
Stinger, thank you so much for being part of Transforming Transportation, the 22nd edition. Also on our plenary, we had Ines, Marav, Damilola, Minister Touré, and Jit. Thank you so much. The audience will thank you all together. And now the coffee break. We will resume the program in 20 minutes' time. Good job.